morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. It is your handsome host, Samuel Tanis here. Today on the Mid-Evening Show, we'll be talking about Japanese imperialism in the country of Korea. The Japanese occupation of Korea began in 1910 and ended at the end of World War II. In 1905, in the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1905, the country was indicated by rules of Japan through the Resident General of Korea. Japan formally took over the Korean Empire in 1910. To give you guys an inside look at imperialism, we have three special guests coming all the way from Korea and Japan, and they traveled by boat. The first guest we have is Lee Soo. So tell us, you traveled all the way from Korea, you took a long boat ride. Tell us what that was like before we fire away.
It's very long, but definitely worth it to be here.
Yeah, no, we're very happy to have you. You know, the audience is thrilled to have you. We've got a packed crowd here to see you. As our first guest, we're just going to fire away with the question, how were women primarily treated by Japanese males? Because we've heard other people talk about this, you know, in interviews, but we have it firsthand here, so we'd like to hear from you. Tell us.
Well, Sam, my story is similar to millions of Korean women during this brutal time period. I was taken away from my family when Japan invaded China in 1937 at the age of 12, and about 15 to 20 other girls went along with me. We traveled with a battalion of soldiers into China from Korea. We did domestic duties like cleaning and making food and whatnot, stuff like that. But the real reason why we were there was so we could be comfort women, which was essentially just sex slaves for the soldiers. In Korea, we had little rights, but when Japan came in, women had zero say in anything we did, and there were no values for us.
Sounds like a terrible experience, but we're glad that you're doing better now. We're glad that you were able to share this story with us, Lee Soo. But between 1932 and 1945, Japan forced women from Korea, China, and other occupied nations to become military prostitutes. But our crew is glad that you were one person out of the 10% Korean women that actually came home after the war. So we're glad to have you here. After the break, we have Ming coming from Korea to explain his story. After the break. See you then.
Oh my gosh, Snapple, dude.
No way, you got a Snapple?
I got a Snapple. It says it's from Korea, 1940. Let's read the facts.
Let's check the facts.
Check the facts. 2 SDG goals.
No way.
No way, dude.
That's sick.
So,
Got it.
the first goal chosen was quality education. Interesting. So the Japanese, apparently they destroyed all Korean documents, leaving them with no history to study, and there was minimal schooling for people in general. Korean students only learned from Japanese texts.
Wow.
And weren't allowed to speak Korean in school. They had to speak Japanese.
That's terrible. That's crazy that they got.
So the quality education for the goal is supposed to be positive, but I guess it was negative in Korea during Japanese imperialism.
Sounds about right.
There's another goal.
Oh, really?
There's
another one?
another goal. There's another goal in this fun Snapple fact. No poverty. So Korea was struck with poverty because the Japanese came in and took all the Koreans' lands, and they basically destroyed all the homes so that Japanese people could immigrate, and it left millions of Korean people homeless and jobless.
So this is another opposite goal.
This is an opposite goal. Nothing was positive apparently during the Japanese imperialism.
Doesn't look like much is positive.
Well, those are the 2 SDG goals that we came up with. See you back on the show.
Welcome back, everybody. Moving on from our last interview, we have Ming, a Korean student based out of Seoul during Japan's reign over Korea. Let's welcome him in. Glad to have you on the show. Now, what I do want to know is how you got one of those hats. I've been trying to find one.
My grandfather actually weaved it himself back in South Korea.
Weaved it himself. Is he still around?
No, so
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I would have loved one of those hats.
yeah, no, I mean, Party City.
You get one at Party
They
City?
fire hats.
They did? Okay, yeah. I'll have to check that out, definitely. These hats. The Party City, everyone.
They don't have Party City in South Korea. So.
They do, yeah, so, you know. Okay, anyways, I have 2 questions for you. How was the schooling different from before Japan invaded, and how did it affect Korean culture?
Well, Sam, when I was about 12, I was born in 1910. When I was about 12, I kind of started schooling in Korea, and when Korea was a part of the Empire of Japan, Japan kind of waged an all-out war on Korean culture.
Okay.
So they really just hated our culture.
Oh, okay.
And schools and universities forbade speaking Korea and emphasized manual labor and loyalty to the emperor. So public places adopted Japanese, the language, and an edict to make films in Japan, Japanese followed. So like our movies weren't allowed to speak Korean, they had to be in Japanese. So everything was based on Japanese, which is a lot different from what was in the past. but it also became a crime to teach history from non-approved text, and authorities burned over 200,000 Korean historical texts.
Are you serious?
So basically, when Japan came in, Korean history was wiped out. Korea was like a fresh slate. There was nothing to it.
That is awful.
It was terrible. It was shocking and it was brutal. But the worst of all, we had to change our names.
Really? Do you remember? So are you actually Ming, or did you have a...
No, so there was some people just didn't want to change their name, so I kept my name. My parents let me keep it. We had to do it in private. So it was just a huge cultural change because our culture was just despised by Japan. School was just different because we weren't even allowed to know anything about the outside world.
World, yeah, no problem. Yeah, first time on TV.
Yeah, first time on TV.
So thank you for sharing your story, Ming. With all this change going on in Korea, the Korean people didn't submit passively to Japanese rule. Throughout the occupation, protest movements pushed for Korean independence. In 1919, the March 1st movement proclaimed Korean independence, and more than 1,500 demonstrations broke out. These protests were brutally suppressed by the Japanese, but not before the desire for independence swept through Korea. Koreans also protested in their own quiet ways. Some refused to speak Japanese or change their names, like you. So that's fantastic. Others came up with names that reflected their family history or committed subtle resistance to their policy. So it's fascinating to hear. I found all these people are happy to hear you. So after the break, we have a man that was not a fan of this throughout the process of Korean independence, but you will find that out after the break. Oh, hello. Sam Tanis, University of Korea's Dean, 1940. At our school, we like to focus on two Persia themes, I for intelligence and R for religion. A big aspect of our school is discipline. We don't tolerate any nonsense. To begin, we chose I for intelligence. After imperializing Korea, the Japanese implemented a nationwide public school system that spanned the Korean borders. In these schools, the Japanese would influence the Koreans in a way that destroyed the existing Korean culture and forced them upon the Japanese ways. Like I said, extremely harsh, but our university is great. Furthermore, we chose R for religion. Culturally, the Japanese distinguished any Korean culture and replaced it with their own. They burned nearly all the books, documents, artifacts, etc., that promoted Korean culture. As you can tell, we're not a big fan of the Koreans, but we also burnt down their shrines and government buildings. Japan, basically, we came in and we wiped out Korea's history. At our university, we are strictly Japanese, and we want you to attend. Admissions open May 2020. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Next, we have a man who wasn't a fan of the thought process of Korean independence. We'd now like to introduce the most hated man on the show, Mr. Private Keo. Mr. Keo, we're glad to have you.
Thank you. Yes.
Like I did for the others, Private Keo, I would like to ask you a few questions.
Go for it.
As a soldier, you destroyed most of Korea's culture, which wasn't cool, by the way. But I was wondering if what the others were saying was true, because maybe we didn't get both sides. I'd like to hear your side.
Well, yes, it is true. When we came to Korea, our primary goal was to destroy their culture and implement our own. We burned down their shrines, homes, and government buildings, like the Royal Palace, Jeong, which was built in Seoul in 1395 by the mighty Joseon dynasty. Soon after assuming power, the Japanese colonial government tore down a third of the complex's historic buildings, as the remaining structures were turned into tourist attractions for Japanese visitors. We basically made the Korean people worthless, and they were nobody while we were occupying them. We killed thousands and treated them like dirt.
That is extremely sad. So, one more question. Did you industrialize Korea?
Yes, we did actually. During the occupation, Japan took over Korea as labor and land. Nearly 100,000 Japanese families settled in Korea with land they had been given, and they chopped down trees by the millions and implemented factories. But we didn't do it on a huge scale. We mainly forced people into hard slavery for the war effort.
Thank you, Private Keo. I don't understand why you're so hated. It seemed like you were just trying to do your job. Oh, dude. Oh.
Thank you for having me on the show. Sam.
No problem. Well, that answers our question. I just ripped my mustache off, but Imperialism has affected so many countries. There are positives to many of these, but sadly for Korea, there weren't too many positives. Japanese ruthlessness destroyed a whole generation of Korean people. Well, folks, that's about all the time we have for this evening show. As always, we thank our guests for coming out and sharing their stories. I'm your really handsome host, Samuel Tanis, and we will see you at the next show, where we have LeBron James coming in.